Well, good afternoon, and thanks for joining our webinar. I'm Jessica Groskopf, an extension educator based in the Department of Agricultural Economics at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Today's webinar is a part of our Center for Ag Profitability's weekly series, coming to you every Thursday at noon Central. Find a complete schedule and a host of helpful resources on our website at cap.unl.edu. In the recent weeks and months, storms have damaged crops and bins across the state. Today, our panel will discuss the decisions that many producers in affected areas are facing in the areas of crop insurance, grain marketing, and grain storage. Joining me today is Cory Walters, an associate professor in the Department of Agricultural Economics here at UNL. Hi, Cory.
Good morning, Jessica.
And we also have David Jones, a professor and department head of Biological Systems Engineering. Thanks for joining us, David.
My pleasure.
All right, Cory. So why don't you get us started off thinking about crop insurance first? What are some of the things, especially in 2021, that we need to be thinking about in terms of storm damage and from a crop insurance perspective?
Yeah, so on the insurance side, the key is this year the prices that are coming through from where we started from the spring on that revenue protection policy. And I'm going to stick pretty much to revenue protection. There's a little bit of the exclusion sold. I'll touch on that in the end, and there's also some yield protection, but the revenue protection is the big one. And there's a little caveat embedded in that policy that makes it intriguing, yet maybe sometimes a bit more convoluted. So I'm going to share my screen, and you can see that, Jessica?
We're actually seeing your, it's not in presenter view if you want to change that.
Let me hit that guy. There we go.
Yep, you're good.
Let's give a little base to the revenue protection policy. For corn over the last 20 years, that change between the spring price and the fall price, out of 14 years, the spring price has been higher than the fall price. And right now, I don't want to jump ahead too fast. So out of 6 years out of 20, the fall price has been higher than the spring price, but typically they can be pretty close. The real big difference is in the drought of 2012, where that fall price was substantially higher than that spring price. This year, we walked into this thing this past spring with a spring price or projected price of $4.58. And right now, if we were to look at December futures for corn, December futures, we'd be at $5.55. So we're likely to be above the projected price come this fall, but that's still yet to be seen. There's still plenty of time between now and then. Soybeans, just for the information, is similar. I think in 9 years out of 20, the fall price has been higher than the spring price. So what does that mean? This is embedded in the functionality of revenue protection. Two sources in an insurance product can generate payments, both yields and prices. When the harvest price is less than the projected price, then payments can come from yields and or prices. That's pretty much where the place where we expect to be seen. However, when harvest prices are greater than the projected price, then that guarantee is recalculated using the harvest price. And what that intuitively does is leaves you only one source to generate payments, and that is yield. So you have to have a yield loss to generate any type of payment. And that gets very specific to what you're doing and where you're at and the storms you face. So in a kind of stripped down world, I'll start there and I'll walk into it into a bit more complicated one, a more real one. If you were to take revenue protection between irrigated production and non-irrigated production, and you experience a drought where prices go higher, or anything that drives prices up, as we said here, yields have to drop below the guarantee to generate a payment. Well, then what crop practice is more likely to generate a payment? Is it non-irrigated production to drop below the guarantee, or irrigated production to drop below the guarantee? Well, that's a very producer-specific question. It gets deep into what the guarantee does. If you're under an irrigated production and you really, the big risk in irrigated production is going to be wind, hail, and a wet spring, where there's 1993 is the year. You then, to get a payment under revenue protection when prices are higher, you have to have a yield loss, and you got to couple all of those things up. Leaves you a lot of years where you may be paying revenue protection and premiums and not necessarily getting much out of it. But again, it only takes 1 year to really to get a payment to really pay off all those other premiums paid where you didn't get payments. And this year may be that year, and each individual has to walk through that on what they've experienced. So with these storms, it separates people. And this year, that you have to walk through what you're experiencing in that year. So with higher prices, you have to have a yield loss to generate a payment. It's not going to come from the price side, as it's being recalculated into the guarantee. Now, that's not too bad. It gets tougher when you start marketing stuff ahead of time, and you're walking through that average price that you've generated on in this world, along with crop insurance, along with a reevaluated yield out there. Keep adapting to whatever's happening. You may be rolling contracts into next year. Maybe you can buy out of them now if you're oversold. It's a subjective measure of how much you sell ahead of time. Some of our work has suggested up around 30%, even with an 85% coverage level, where you have a lot of bushels guaranteed, because of the buybacks and moving things around get kind of complicated and can get bad. But nevertheless, the insurance is there for a reason, and it may make up a big portion this year of revenue loss due to storms.
Great, thank you, Cory. Just as a reminder that if you have any questions for either of our panelists, please go ahead and utilize the chat feature or the Q&A feature to ask those questions. So we are going to move over to
one other thing. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
If this revenue protection thing with the harvest price is still a little vague, because again, we don't see it very often, take a look at our most recent Cornhusker Economics article. It'll walk through it in as about the simplest form as you can find to see how that thing works. And I think, Jessica, you might be putting that up in the chat.
Yep, I will get that into the chat box here in just a moment. Any other final comments?
Always feel free to reach out to me, or I'm sure Jessica's same, if you got any specific questions, because a lot of this stuff, everyone's on their own financial path through this. You need to take a good look at that. And of course, you got to know your costs of where you're at and how you're making those decisions in this world here. And reevaluate how you select insurance for next year. And I'd be happy to engage in a conversation with anyone about that, especially as we experience rare events.
Great, thank you. Dr. Jones, do you want to provide some perspective from your end from a grain storage point of view? You're on mute.
Go. Thank you. I'm glad to join this conversation. I want to start off by iterating and being clear that there's not a lot of magic here when you have a situation where you have infrastructure that is damaged and the lead time to either repair or replace that infrastructure is months, or in some ways even over a year. I was visiting with an engineer up in Yankton South Dakota, and he was talking about installers being booked for the next 18 months. Now, I don't know how you can, intervening on their schedule or being able to get something before that, but the repair time is quite lengthy right now on our infrastructure. I think appreciate Cory's conversation about the cost and the insurance parameters, because I think those are important when you are making decisions on how to respond to the breakdown in infrastructure. I think this is one of those times where you look to neighbors, where you look to the commercial storage, and where you try to combine those local storage with marketing to optimize your system. That system optimization does not only include cost and price, but you should also include timeliness and field efficiencies. I can just imagine when you're not in a position to unload at the local farmstead, your travel time between field to where you unload will likely increase, and therefore that's going to put more stress on your equipment inventory. So those are the type of things that I would say that you should think through what that harvest, drying, and ultimately storage considerations really are. So let's talk about harvest for a minute. I think when you start looking at how your harvesting, trucking, drying, storage is elongated, I think the first thing to consider is, when do I start harvest? And I'm not going to tell you that means automatically you start earlier, because it may mean that you would rather push the risk about the field loss, so you will have less drying. If you have drying capacity, but you don't have storage capacity, you might say, well, let's start harvest earlier, right? And those are both logistic and economic considerations. So I would offer that as a place to start this conversation. And I'd be glad to take your particular questions, and if nothing else, to better understand what you're facing. As you're putting those questions together, I too would like to share my screen, and we're going to practice this. All right, let's see how we do. All right, Jessica, I'm going to put the source of this in the chat. Is that all right?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay. This, what you're seeing, I hope, is, are you seeing a PDF with a table that says shelf life?
Yes, we are.
Excellent. Okay, so this is from an older NEB guide. I think it's still valid. The data and the science has not changed. And what this is trying to give you a sense for is particularly how long you can hold wet grain without having having severe damage. And that damage is from dry matter decomposition. Damage to handling and insects and stuff are not considered here. This is just from dry matter decomposition. And obviously, if it's hot and wet, which is the lower right-hand corner of the table, you do not have very many days of storage before you have damage. The cooler and the dryer, the upper left, obviously you have much longer, a longer time frame to make decisions and to market without having challenges. The thing that I also want to iterate is that this table assumes that there is at least 1/10 CFM per bushel of grain, of air per grain. And that is designed, or there, the assumption is that the heat of respiration is dissipated. So you're able to hold the grain at the temperature that's stored. Now, if you've stored grain, you realize that that's not true, right? Because the weather pattern changes, et cetera. So I don't want to leave you with the idea that it is just as simple as this table, but this is some a prompting for your thinking on how you can store your grain.
So Dave, you're assuming they have a fan or something to push some air through that to keep it at those temperatures there. Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And as you know, we have daily temperature changes, and the local climate and weather conditions will dictate that fan management. And my part of my assumption is that particularly folks that have damaged bins or other infrastructure, they may have diminished capacity to do this, right? And so particularly if you're going to pile it on the ground, you need to realize that there will be degradation because you have very little temperature control in those circumstances. I guess the other thing that I would say is this is a social and collaborative suggestion, but man, talk to the elevator early, right? Try to understand what they think their pressures are going to be, because it's not just capacity, it is rate of harvest that is a concern in these circumstances.
So let's talk a little. Oh, go ahead, Cory.
I think I might be going where Jessica's going. So if we went to grain bags as an alternative, which I'm seeing more around, this moisture temperature thing can be a pretty wild dynamic. There's a lot of surface area around those bags.
Yes, and it really, the grain bags, it's a different strategy, right? And with the grain bags, the strategy is to control the environment, and seal it up and keep it there. And there's two spectrums, and typically the grain bags are wet. So you seal it up, you end up having a little oxidation or respiration, consume all the oxygen, and everything is hermetically sealed. I do not have experience with that storage, but I know people have used it successfully.
So considering, let's go back to the discussion of starting harvest early and maybe potentially doing some high moisture harvest. Are there any considerations from either of your standpoints regarding high moisture, pulling off some of that crop early? So Cory, I'll offer you that opportunity first.
Yeah, I would follow Dave's advice where he said, go talk to the elevator right away. If you're running around a corn deficit area due to storm damage, you might find discounts have all of a sudden disappeared because they're trying to incentivize you to bring them corn. I would immediately call and find out from your local elevators what's going on. The more information, the better, to help craft a plan to financially work through this.
Yeah, and I will kick back to Cory. One of the questions I would have as a producer is, okay, I may not lose yield, but I'm about to lose a lot of cash or margin because of the extra drying and storage cost. And that goes to, is the yield insured or is the profit insured? And those I would assume need to be part of the consideration. I guess the other thing I would say is if you don't know your neighbors, this is probably a good time to get acquainted, because they may or may not have storage or infrastructure close by. And the reason I emphasize that is because the cost of trucking and shipping is not zero. And so if you can have it in close proximity, that always could be a benefit to you.
The other one I like in this is each individual have to come to their own conclusion. But I think Dave maybe was a little shy on the ground pile part. We don't want to open ourselves up to a gigantic risk of losing a lot of product because of other unforeseen events occur, and those losses in that ground pile shoot way up, and then you're financially even worse off. So there's still plenty of uncertainty on the table there.
Yeah.
So sometimes that safer bet of taking that to the elevator at harvest, maybe there's a combination there that works, but the other side of on-farm storage, especially in a more open environment, does increase the possibility of strange things happening, and we just can't see those coming. Yeah.
And the ground pile, I'm not lobbying, don't misunderstand, but you see more ground piles at the elevator than you do on the farm. Why is that, right? And the reason for the most part is capital, because the elevator is able to put aeration under, perhaps put tarping over, and they can spread those capital costs over larger volumes than perhaps an individual producer could. And so that's another reason to talk to the elevator about what their plan is when they run out of storage, and how your plan might integrate with them. I liked what you said, Cory, about some of those discounts disappearing when you're in those corn-starved areas. And I think that's a really good observation and something to take advantage of.
So let's talk a little bit more, and Cory, I think this is probably more your area of expertise, is related to what does elevator storage run approximately in Nebraska, and what kind of expenses would producers potentially face as they deliver that then in town?
Was that to me? I'm sorry, it kind of cut out a second.
Yes, that was to you. So talking about potential fees and in-town storage costs.
On high moisture corn.
Correct.
Okay. So this kind of leads into another project that's been off to the side. Is we have a moisture harvest calculator that will help with this specifically. The corn had two things: shrinkage and just a fee for whatever percent you were above that. They usually stair steps down as a dockage that goes with that. At some point, they usually get pretty big, and or they tell you we won't take any more. That's what's variable by the elevator. They can change that at any point. It's all about what you see coming and what actually happens. We're going to have a webinar in September on exactly the harvest moisture calculator for both corn and soybeans. That one's slightly different than what we're talking about here, in the sense that one's on do I harvest 9 moisture corn or 16? Which one, or 18 or 20? Which one's more financially problematic? And we can actually model that with the discounts, and you may be a bit surprised maybe where you want to begin harvest. Yeah, I don't know where the discounts are right now. It's a moving target, but I would definitely find out what those are. I have heard across here some places are there's none for high moisture corn up to a certain point. So things can move. Go find out what's going on locally.
And just to give you an idea, so commercial elevator storage, at least in Western Nebraska, is approximately, depending on the elevator, about 3 to 4 cents per bushel per month. They might charge you that on a daily basis. They also might provide a grace period that if you sell within the first 30 days, you won't pay that first 30 days of storage. So again, going back to your elevator and really talking with them about what those storage fees are. Cory, when we were setting up this webinar, you also asked and talked about carrying charges. Is there something within the market like carrying charges that we should be watching as well? Yeah.
So the market talks to you in two specific ways when you look at futures markets. Of course, you got the actual price, and then the other one is the difference in the contracts as you go out in time from harvest going forward. So right now on December 21 corn, the futures is around 555. March, you're at 563. So there you're picking up 8 cents, 8-cent carry. And then May, you're at 568, so not too much more. In July, you're at 567. So nothing too great right now on the market carry. That doesn't mean, well, it means a couple of things. One is there's not a lot of carrying charge in there for you to capture. Two, the markets have been moving pretty good. So between now and springtime, they can move a lot in one direction or the other. And then the other one is basis. What's your local elevator basis offered right now? And if you're in that corn deficit area and the elevators after corn, that basis number again could get really attractive compared to previous harvest time basis. Again, incentivizing, delivering corn at harvest. So while we may want to, start off with kind of a set of conditions that we like let's say we don't like delivering corn at harvest. We like to use our storage. There are maybe a set of financial conditions that tell you that it's actually worthwhile to send more to harvest if basis gets real, above average where it's been, or smaller than, less negative number. And maybe those fees for drying go away. And so there's two financial incentives to change your mind. So it's you kind of walk forward with you kind of have an idea of what you want to do, but when the numbers start coming out, they can sway you to adjust your strategy to make sure you're financially well off as best possible.
So again, if you have any questions for our presenters, you can submit them through the chat or through the Q&A. So go ahead.
Oh, they're being very quiet as of this point. So I
Yep. So again, if you have those, go ahead and submit them. So Cory, as we continue to watch the market, again, as the market goes up, we're not just looking at the price, then we're also looking at the differences in the contracts and what we have in on-farm storage. Is there any other considerations from your perspective as we move ahead in terms of the financial viability of those farms?
I'm not quite following you.
What other considerations should we, well,
are you talking like debt load or something to?
Correct.
Yeah. So yeah. How much risk can you take before the banker is no longer your friend is a very relevant question that we all individually have to answer. There's a lot of money floating in ag right now. Everything is creeping up. I mean, well, commodity prices are creeping up, so costs are going to be creeping up too. And the higher costs go up, the more it hurts as you go down. The farther you can fall, and it's going to hurt a little more. And that's where crop insurance does lessen that blow. Each year we have to reset going forward. We have to reset going into 2022 because prices are at a different level. Inputs are at a different level. I would put a plug in here. I see Larry's on for the ABC calculator. Know your costs. If you want to make an informed decision about where profits are at and your ability to survive in the future, then you have to have a clear, emotionless picture of what it actually costs you to produce a crop, and that then informs you of how much expected profit is there when you're forward contracting. Because this market doesn't care about an individual farmer. There's gonna be winners and losers, and it looks like it's gonna be a good ride going forward. As expected with higher prices, things are gonna move around a lot. Marketing isn't about getting the highest price. It's also about surviving where you can make money in the future. And regardless of how your marketing has worked this year, remember that marketing is after survival. It's not after the highest price. Too many conversations with producers about, well, I marketed too early this year. I know what they're thinking. They're like, I'm going to do that next year. I'm going to wait. There's going to be this thing happen. Well, the numbers, the history is against you on that. Don't follow what worked last year. Follow your costs. Keep your profit at your average price sold as high as possible, so that you can ensure a profit, so you can get into future years. It's but it's tough. But you got to come at it with the facts, the costs, and goals and objectives, and marry those two things up, and also have an understanding of the risks you face. These storms are real. It can hit you next year. The knife is sharp on these things.
The only thing I would, just to echo and elaborate on that, and Cory, you didn't say this, but let me make sure that it's broad. It's not just about when you sell. It's also about when you harvest, because in many ways you're saying, do I harvest today, or is it worth the risk? Because there's a cost to harvesting today, and there's also a cost of not harvesting today. And somewhere in there, that's where the money's made, quite frankly. And that's why I'm in Lincoln and academia, not making those decisions, right? But part of that cost that I want to highlight is the risk of field loss balanced with the cost of drying or discount. And you have to have what your decision making a year ago is not going to apply this year, is what I heard you say, Cory. And that would certainly be the case in those harvest today or wait to harvest decisions.
So again, I'm going to offer the opportunity. If you have any questions, please place them in the chat or the Q&A. If we don't have any questions, we'll wrap up our webinar a little bit early. So I'm going to give you just a few minutes, maybe a minute, to do that. And while we wait to see if any questions come in through the chat, I do want to share another resource that is available through the University of Nebraska Lincoln. If you did receive any damage to your bins, we actually do have a project over in civil engineering that is looking at bin damage, and especially if you have some bins that were damaged and some that were not. Researchers in that department are very interested in understanding that damage. So I will, after I'm done sharing the slide, I will put that link in the chat for you, or you can also use your phone to scan the QR code there as well. So again, if you have damage, you can actually submit photographs through that link so that they can see some of the damage that you sustained.
I got one other comment to make. This year is not the year to evaluate whether you should hedge forward contract or not. It is the year that you realize the cost of forward contracting. You have to go back to the years where you forward contracted and prices went down, and the financial benefit of doing that versus not doing that in those particular years, because those are the years where things get tighter, bankers get a little more jumpy. It's not this year you evaluate hedging. This is just the cost of hedging. You got to go back to those other years where you were able to make ends meet due to hedging, and know that those years are more often to occur than these years. And so that the time is on your side, but the individual year, it can look bad. But I would in no means consider abandoning hedging. Maybe you adjust how you hedge. In fact, these higher prices incentivize you to be looking into 2022, maybe a little bit earlier, because everything's up. Even though when we look into December 2022, the market is definitely inverted because of that supply. But don't let that stop you, because we know that higher prices, we're going to try to drive that down by expanding corn production acreage as best as possible. And of course, soybeans will be fighting for that too. But typically years after higher prices, prices end up coming down because we go for it. We put more into it.
Dr. Jones, do you have any final thoughts?
Not, I guess I would just say, Cory, I keep echoing what you're saying, but this, for those of you that have damage, I think it would be interesting to your observations on what that diminished infrastructure does to your operation, right? And I think that in and of itself will help inform how you recover. What, do you build back the same? Do you enlarge? Maybe you got by with what you had? And so I think I would just encourage this to be a year of observation about how those operations work.
All right, so the one question we did have in the chat was whether or not we could provide the charts and the links. Those links will be posted on our website, cap.unl.edu, after today's webinar, along with a recording of the webinar. So as I don't see any other additional questions, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Again, a recording of this webinar will be posted at cap.unl.edu, where you can register for our other upcoming sessions. As a reminder, check the site for a schedule of more webinars from the new Center for Ag Profitability. Joining us next week at noon, we will look at early weeding practices and costs and potential benefits. So thank you all again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on a future session.
Thank you.